In the dead of winter, 1944, the Allied war effort in Europe was pushed to its breaking point. This crisis, however, didn't come from a German panzer division or a Luftwaffe bombing raid. It came from a room full of reporters and a single, catastrophic press conference. With American forces suffering staggering casualties, approximately 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 missing, in the brutal fighting of the Battle of the Bulge, the alliance that stood against Nazi Germany was about to be shattered. It wouldn't be by a bullet, but by the words of one British general. His remarks would ignite a political firestorm, pushing normally calm American commanders to the brink of resignation and forcing an emergency intervention from Winston Churchill himself. This is the story of the press conference that almost broke the Allies. On December 16, 1944, over 400,000 German troops and more than 1,000 tanks smashed through a thinly defended section of the Allied line in the Ardennes forest. It was Hitler's last, desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace. The surprise attack caught the Americans completely off guard. Horrific weather grounded the Allies' dominant air power, and for the GIs on the front line, it was a frozen hell of confusion and desperate defense. The Allied command structure was thrown into chaos. The Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, tried to orchestrate the response from his headquarters, but his top American field commander, General Omar Bradley, found himself in an impossible position. Bradley's 12th Army Group headquarters was geographically and electronically cut off from his two main armies fighting in the northern half of the German penetration, or Bulge. He couldn't issue orders, he couldn't coordinate their movements, he couldn't lead. The American 1st and 9th Armies were fighting for their lives, and their commander was flying blind. Facing a potential collapse on the northern shoulder of the Bulge, Eisenhower had to make one of the most difficult decisions of his career. He needed a commander on the scene, someone whose headquarters had clear communications with the embattled American divisions. That commander was the British Field Marshal, Bernard Montgomery. On December 20, 1944, Eisenhower made the call. He temporarily transferred command of two entire American armies, the 1st and the 9th, from Omar Bradley to Montgomery. Operationally, it was the only logical choice. Montgomery's 21st Army Group headquarters was perfectly positioned to manage the battle in the north, but professionally and politically, it was a grenade with the pin pulled. Omar Bradley was furious. These were his armies, filled with his men. Giving them to Montgomery, a general known for his immense ego and condescending attitude, was a public humiliation. It implied that American leadership had failed and that a British field marshal was needed to clean up the mess. Eisenhower insisted the move was purely tactical and temporary, a necessity of the battlefield. Bradley, a soldier's soldier, swallowed his pride and accepted the decision. For the next few weeks, the Americans fought with legendary tenacity. The 101st Airborne was surrounded at the crucial crossroads of Bastogne. Other divisions held the line at places like St. Vith, bleeding the German offensive to a halt in the snow and ice. General George S. Patton's Third Army, in a stunning feat of logistics, wheeled 90 degrees and slammed into the southern flank of the Bulge to relieve Bastogne. By early January, the German offensive was broken. The crisis was over. The victory, bought with staggering American losses, was secured. And if you're finding this story of high command drama fascinating, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the lesser-known stories of military history. Now, with the battle won, that's when Montgomery decided to hold his press conference. On January 7, 1945, at his headquarters in Belgium, Field Marshal Montgomery stood before a room of war correspondents. The battle was won, and he was ready to explain how. He spoke for an hour without notes in his typically confident, almost jaunty manner. He described how the Germans had created a dangerous situation, and how he had taken command to stabilize the front. According to multiple press reports, the language was classic Montgomery, self-assured and focused on his own actions. He spoke of tidying up the mess, implying the American command had been in disarray. But the final blow, the phrase that would detonate the alliance, came when he praised the American soldiers' fighting spirit, but with a devastating qualifier. The American GI, Montgomery was reported to have said, is a great fighting man, but only when given the proper leadership. To the reporters in the room and soon to the world, the implication was clear. The Americans had been failing until he, Montgomery, arrived to provide that proper leadership. The battle, which had seen staggering American casualties compared to just over 1,400 for the British, was being framed as a British-led rescue. For the American commanders who had just watched tens of thousands of their men die, it was an unforgivable insult. By the next morning, January 8th, the crisis exploded. At his headquarters, General Omar Bradley read the newspaper accounts. Witnesses said they had never seen him so angry. For years, he had endured Montgomery's arrogance. He had accepted the temporary loss of his armies. But this public claim of credit for a victory won with American blood was the final straw. Bradley picked up the phone and called Eisenhower. According to Bradley's own memoirs, his words were an ultimatum. "By God, Ike, I cannot serve under Montgomery." He told Eisenhower that if the situation wasn't rectified, he would resign. This was no idle threat. Bradley was known as the GI's general, and his resignation would have triggered a political catastrophe in Washington. 50 miles to the south, General George S. Patton read the same reports. His reaction was, characteristically, even more volcanic. In his diary entry for that day, now preserved in the Library of Congress, Patton's fury is palpable. He called Montgomery a tired little fart, and a lying bastard who was trying to steal credit for the American victory. The two most powerful American generals in the field were united in their rage. They didn't just see it as a personal insult. They saw it as a betrayal of their soldiers. The entire command structure of the Western Front was on the verge of collapsing, not from enemy action, but from internal strife. Eisenhower now faced the gravest crisis of his command. The Allied coalition was fracturing from within. He acted with lightning speed, convincing Bradley to hold off for 48 hours and promising he would make it right. Eisenhower immediately signaled his understanding of the severity of the backlash, but a military fix wasn't enough. The political damage was done, and the story was raging in the American press. The crisis had reached the highest levels of government. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill saw the danger clearly. Montgomery's ego had created a diplomatic incident that threatened to poison the entire Anglo-American relationship. On January 18, 1945, Churchill stood before the House of Commons to perform emergency political surgery. In a speech designed to soothe American fury, he explicitly corrected the record. He declared, "The United States troops have done almost all the fighting and have suffered almost all the losses." He then delivered a line aimed directly at Montgomery, a public rebuke of his own top general. "Care must be taken in telling our proud tale not to claim for the British Army an undue share of what is undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever-famous American victory." Churchill's speech worked. It calmed the political storm and reassured Washington. General Bradley was satisfied, and the immediate crisis passed. But on the ground, among the generals, the damage was permanent. The professional trust American commanders had for Montgomery was gone. In his memoirs, written years later, Omar Bradley's anger was still fresh. He described the press conference as an infuriating act of arrogance that convinced him Montgomery was a menace to Allied unity. Patton's diaries continued to spit venom about Montgomery until the end of his life. Eisenhower himself would later write that the bitterness generated by that one press conference lasted for the rest of the war and beyond. The ultimate irony is that Montgomery never seemed to understand what he had done. In his own memoirs, he dismissed the entire affair as an overreaction by sensitive Americans who had misunderstood him. His failure to grasp the depth of the anger he caused was, perhaps, the very reason he caused it in the first place. He had sought to burnish his own legacy, but instead he had tarnished it, creating a wound within the Allied command that never truly healed. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest and bloodiest battle the United States fought in World War II. It was a testament to the courage of the American soldier and the resilience of the Allied coalition. Yet that coalition was almost broken, not by the German army, but by the ego of a single commander and the power of his words. The story of Montgomery's press conference is a stark reminder that wars are fought not only on battlefields, but also in headquarters, in newspapers, and in the hearts of leaders. It reveals the immense pressure on coalition command, and shows how easily national pride and personal vanity can threaten to unravel even the strongest of alliances when the stakes are at their highest. History is shaped by courage and sacrifice, but it is also shaped by the personalities who get to tell the story. Let us know in the comments which part of the story stayed with you